Guys, I'll be explaining about some of the important diagrams as well as important structures present in the ascending pathways. So basically, before we reach on that, we have to know the first order neuron, second order neuron and third order neuron, from where do they start and till where do they end. So first we'll look after the first order neuron. So first order neurons, they mainly start or they receive impulses from the receptors, then it passes to the posterior gray horn. It mainly receives the impulse from the receptors and then they give it to posterior gray horn. They receives impulse from receptors and then to posterior gray horn. This was about the first order neuron. So what are the second order neurons? The second order neurons. So the second order neurons, they are present in the posterior gray horn. The first order neurons end in the posterior gray horn. The second order neuron starts from there. So it starts from posterior gray horn. They carry the impulses from spinal cord to the subcortical areas. So they carry impulse from spinal cord to subcortical area. It might be medulla, it might be thalamus or anything. So this was about the second order neuron. So we'll see the third order neurons. So the third order neurons, they are present in the subcortical area. Since the second order neurons end in the subcortical area, the third order neurons begins from the subcortical area and they finally send the information to the sensory cortex area, mainly 312, area number 312. So they are present in subcortical areas. So the information is finally sent to sensory cortex area number 312. It finally sends to the sensory cortex area number 312. As we know, in our body there are 31 pairs of unsymmetrical spinal cord segments. There are 31 pairs of unsymmetrical spinal cord segments. So we have to know the names of these segments, which is a basic general information. In spinal cord, you know, there is presence of cervical segments. Then comes the thoracic segment. Then comes the lumbar segment. Sacral segment. And finally, the coccygeal segment. The coccygeal segment. So these are the different types of segments present in the unsymmetrical. These are the unsymmetrical segments of the spinal cord. Cervical segments are 8 in number. Thoracic segments are 12 in number. Lumbar segments are 5 in number. Sacral is also 5 in number. Finally, the coccygeal segments is 1 in number. So they are unsymmetrically paired. So there is 31 pairs of spinal cord roots or segment present in our body. So this was about the spinal cord. Now we look after the classification of the matter. So the matter is of two types, as I mentioned in the earlier videos. So matter is of two types. First one is the gray matter and the second one is the white matter. So you have to know this. In spinal cord, the gray matter is present inside, inwards, and the white matter is present outwards. Whereas in the brain, the white matter is present inside and the gray matter is present outside. It's vice versa. So it's better you remember any one so that you can remember the other opposite by yourself. So there is gray matter as well as white matter. The gray matter have two types of cells, that is anterior horn cells as well as the posterior horn cells. They have anterior horn cells as well as the posterior cells, it is the white gray matter as well as the white matter. So whereas the white matter have anterior white column as well as the posterior white column. It has anterior white column as well as the posterior white column. So matter, it is of gray and white. So gray matter have anterior horn cells and posterior horn cells, whereas the white matter have anterior white column as well as posterior white column. So now we'll see how are these fibers. So you have to know this diagram. It's quite good if you know all these introduction bases. So I'm just drawing the rough diagram. So let it be the X10th cervical fiber. This is the first one, second one, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. After that there is ninth as well as eighth one. You can see first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. So these are the fibers, these are the segments. So if you divide here, this is known as the upper motor neuron and the lower part of the central canal. Okay, if this is central canal, this is known as the lower motor neuron. This is known as upper motor neuron, and the lower one is called as, below the line is called as lower motor neuron. The 10th segment is also known as the intercommercial fibers. It is known as intercommercial fibers, which allows the connection between the sensory as well as the motor fibers. From 1 till the 6th one, they are known as the sensory fibers, and the rest is known as motor fibers. That is 1 to 6th, from 7th till 9th is known as motor fibers. So sensory fibers are from 1 to 6, and motor fibers is from 7 to 9. And the 10th one is known as intercommercial fiber. If you do the cross section, the upper part is known as the upper motor neuron and the lower part is called as lower motor neuron, and the 10th one is called as intercommercial fibers. Then there is another classification which you have to know, basically, that is tracts. So tracts are classified into two based upon their areas. First one is known as thalamic tract and the second one is known as cerebellar tract. So tracts are two types. There are thalamic tracts as well as cerebellar tracts. In the thalamic tract, it is classified into anterior thalamic tract as well as posterior thalamic tract. Anterior thalamic tract as well as posterior thalamic tract. It is also called as ventral thalamic tract as well as dorsal thalamic tract. If you see the cerebellar tracts, in cerebellar tracts also there is anterior cerebellar tract as well as posterior cerebellar tract. There is anterior cerebellar tract and posterior cerebellar tract. The anterior cerebellar tract is also known as the ventral cerebellar tract. The posterior cerebellar tract is also known as the dorsal cerebellar tract. So this was the classification of the tracts. In the tracts mainly there are thalamic tract, cerebellar tract. In the thalamic tract there is anterior thalamic known as ventral thalamic, posterior thalamic known as dorsal thalamic. If you speak about the cerebellar tracts, in cerebellar tracts there is anterior cerebellar tract or ventral cerebellar tract as well as the posterior spinocerebellar tract. It might be also called as spinocerebellar, anterior spinothalamic tract, posterior spinothalamic tract. So basically what does this spinal indicates? So spinothalamic, there is some connection between the spinal cord as well as thalamus. Spinothalamic, connection between spinal cord as well as thalamus. If you say about the cerebellar tract, spinocerebellar in the sense there is some tracts which connects from spinal cord till the cerebellum region. Spinal cord and cerebellum region. So this was about the introduction. Now we'll study about some of the important diagrams. There are 3 important diagrams which you have to know, so that you will be quite responsive, so that you can understand the later upcoming parts. So that's it about this video. I hope you have liked this video. In the next video, we'll study the 2 important diagrams. So if you will be prone to the next other nucleus, we'll study about the different types of nucleus and what is the parts of the spinal cord. Thank you. Please do like, share and subscribe.